Niels, we are excited for you to be here. And Niels, we met through a mutual friend. Um,
Mhm.
I think it was actually Mitchell that introduced us. And Mitchell's on the advisory for Christian Story Lab. He's like, hey, you need to know about this guy. He's on LinkedIn. He's running Christian community. He helps writers and authors like you're trying to do the Christian Story Lab, all of these great things. And so I don't know if I sent, you sent, we sent a message to each other. We jumped on a call. We ended up talking for over an hour about writing and story and all of that. And I thought, man, Niels, you have so much wisdom about writing. You have so much experience. You have so much coaching experience and teaching that you'd just be invaluable to share some of that in the community. So I want to turn it over to you, Niels, because I know you have a lot of information. So give us a bird's eye view, who you are, what you do, and then what are we going to talk about today? And let's roll right into it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm Niels Kwakenaak. So that's, I think, a difficult name for you guys to pronounce. Niels Kwakenaak. Well, I am a storyteller, telling aficionado from Israel. I am married to a beautiful woman named Sarah, and we have three cute little kids, aged 4 to 8. So that is the family front. About 10 years ago, I started editing nonfiction for a multinational from America. And later, I also started my own company called Your Best Story. And I found that many of the manuscripts that landed on my desk had very similar errors, very similar structural problems and problems with continuity and such. And I thought if I could only hop on in the process much earlier, if I could hop on much earlier in the process and start helping writers already from the conceptual stage and with planning and with getting their message well worked out before they start drafting, I would be able to do much more for the writers. I would be able to help them end up with a manuscript that is really ready for editing, for a light copy edit instead of an enormous developmental edit that's still necessary. Because those cost a lot of money. Like editing is expensive. So the less an editor has to do, the better you are off financially. So that got me started into this coaching business because I thought if I can help them earlier, then I'm way more valuable to them. So I began to analyze where are those problems exactly, and that got me to this framework, to this roadmap, the 6-step roadmap that I want to present to you now. The 6 action steps. I divided the writing process into 6 action steps that I deem important for the success of the book. If any of these steps is not done properly, I believe that will result directly in issues with the final manuscript. So I'll just mention them now as a list, and then I'll go into them a little bit, still as brief as possible, because this is like 30 hours worth of course material that I'm trying to squeeze into 20 minutes right now. So bear with me. Also, if anything isn't clear after the third action step, I want to do a Q&A. So a short Q&A session, just in case I'm being too brief. Okay, wait a second. So the first one is align your heart with God's heart. The second one is unlock the redemptive stories inside of you. 3, home in on a single topic and audience. Develop your POV, your point of view, theme, and thesis. 4, organize your ideas into a solid structure. 5, start writing a draft. 6, self-edit your work. So action step number 1. Can you see my mouse, by the way, my cursor? Do you see that? Okay, that's useful for me to know. Okay, align your heart with God's heart. Actually, this is a step for life. You know, whatever you do, you want to align your heart with God's heart. You want to be able to work from the passions that God has given you. So what I inspire my students to do is to ask themselves questions like, what is my heart breaking for? With what kind of people am I compassionate? What is the stuff that makes me cry? What is the influence that I would like to have, that I would love to have in the world? You know, if there's one thing I could change in the world, what would it be? Because I believe that when you have this strong passion and you devote yourself to praying and thinking and talking with God, that He will give you the mission, that He will give you on your heart those things that are important for you to do. You don't care for something so deeply for nothing. So from that, you can call subjects that you can write about. And the good thing about this step is that if you approach subjects or find subjects this way, you are really driven to write about them. And that is something that a reader feels. You cannot write a dull book about a subject that really has your heart, right? So that's why this is the first step. And it is sort of an attitude of life, I would say. But so what I'm telling my students is take long walks, go out into the forest, talk with God, think over your ideas, think through things, and take the time to pray, take the time to really um, uh, search your heart, because that is where God will speak to you if you are willing to listen, if you are willing to spend that time. And the second action step is to unlock the redemptive stories inside of you. I believe, actually, it is scientifically proven that stories are what drives people. If you want to engage somebody, you do that by story. It's a very primitive, if you will, way of communicating. It has been proven that people with extremely low IQs still are engaged by stories. You don't need to be smart to understand the story and to be engaged by that. So if you can find stories that you have been through to use for your subject, for your books, then you have an advantage per se. And often it is a search to get to these stories. So there are many things I recommend that people do to find these stories. For example, to draw a map of the place where you grew up. You draw the streets, you draw the houses of the neighbors, you draw your school, whatever. And you imagine walking those streets, entering those houses where you've been. What stories come up? What sort of experiences come up? Because so much wisdom through story you have actually forgotten. So much of the things, actually, basically everything comes from what you have experienced. And often we remember the concept. We remember what we've learned from the experience. But often we tend to forget the experiences themselves, or at least tend to forget the connection between the lesson and the story. So I always recommend take this time, dive into yourself, and also don't think that these stories are not important. I've spoken with writers who deliberately kept their prose as objective as possible, because if I get too personal, if I tell my own personal stories, I will lose credibility. Well, it is a lie. You will gain credibility if you are vulnerable, if you are authentic. So there are many ways of unlocking these stories. Well, this with a map is the one tip I wanted to give you now. Again, if you want to know more about this, if you want to learn more, you can always get a free coaching session. You can always book a free coaching session on yourbeststory.net. And it's 1 hour just for you to clear these things up, to help you get started with your book. Okay, so that is the second action step. Now you have a subject, and you have a whole lot of stories that might support your subject or have to do with your subject. A subject in itself is typically way too broad to write a book about, unless you want to write some sort of some fat tome that is exhaustive and basically everything that you could ever imagine saying about a certain subject. You end up with some sort of encyclopedia. You don't want that. You want to have a pinpointed message. You want to hone in on your subject. You want to narrow it down that you get a slice of reality is how I call it. That means everything that does not fit with this narrow topic, that does not fit in this narrow slice of reality, you exclude. It has nothing to do with your book. And this is extremely important because I have seen writers go off on all kinds of rabbit trails. And those rabbit trails might be very interesting, but they don't have a place in a book that is on a different topic. So if you narrow down the topic, you create clarity for your reader, and then the reader feels that they are in trusted hands. They can trust you, they can rely on it, that you know where you're going and you know what you're talking about. So that also brings me to audience. This specific topic also has a specific audience. So you have to decide, what audience am I going to speak to? Who is my reader exactly? And make sure that your topic and everything you have to say about the topic works with that particular audience, with that particular reader. And then a very important point, unless you want to write some sort of a textbook, is that you also show your own POV, your point of view, that you have a specific take, a specific opinion on your subject or on your topic, actually. And that is extremely important, because if you don't have a specific take, a specific experience, or a specific point of view, it might as well just be a school book you're writing. And of course, textbooks are important, you need them, but you don't, unless you are hired to write a textbook for some sort of a school, you don't want to write a textbook. You want to share something. So there has to be a specific message that you want to convey. And so this is also an extremely important thing. If you don't have this specific message, the specific take, the specific experience, you will lose your reader. Your book will not be interesting. And if you combine that specific narrow topic with your specific opinion on it, you actually end up with what we call a thesis. A specific point on the topic that you are trying to defend or that you are trying to argue. I won't go too much into thesis and theme right now because it will take me way too much time. But the take-home message here of action step number 3 is narrow it down, make it as narrow as possible, and make sure that you have something challenging to say about it, something that is not exactly the way other people talk about it, or some unique experience, something that makes this topic uniquely yours. Okay, as promised, after action step number 3, we would do some questions.
Yeah, and Niels, I want to, while people generate their questions, and you can either put it in the chat or you can put up the hands, Janet or Nate. Everybody else will have to put it on YouTube, your comment, and answer it. We'll answer it later, who's not live, but.
Or just put me an email. You can always email me or whatever. So
yeah, and we'll definitely point people in that direction. I do want to give one thing I just heard about point of view. Now, this is from a fictional perspective of writing. I know you primarily do nonfiction, but they were talking about, this is from How I Write podcast with David Perel, and he had a review. So I don't remember exactly who the guest was that was talking about this, but they were talking about the value of perspective and point of view, and that as a writer, as the author, whose perspective you are writing from. So he said, this is one of the arguments was against AI, that AI cannot create that level of perception, at least not yet. So it's like AI, and the example he used was like, imagine a 60s, a 50s kitchen. Mom is at the stove cooking up frozen peas, and a little girl walks in, and the chat GPT or whatever AI is going to write that scene. Well, it's going to throw out all of the name brand refrigerator and the frozen peas and the what the mother's dressing. It's going to do all of the facts like a manual to try to capture this scene. What they don't get is the perception, perspective of a little girl who's walking in to see her mother at the kitchen, which is actually
Mhm.
far more important. And you can pull in the details of the time era within the writing of that perspective of watching a mom break peas, one rolls and bounces off the table. You go and grab that frozen pea and put it in your mouth, and
Yeah,
just like you
exactly. And
eat.
also did the how do you call that? The metaphors and so, the internal
Exactly.
metaphors
Yeah.
that
So
actually
always, so I think that's a
the little
huge
girl is
point.
looking up at the mother, that is such a
Yeah,
uh
it's the camera
significant.
in a film and directing, right? Where do you put the camera? Is it behind the bushes peering through, or is it, a bird's eye view looking at everything?
Mhm.
It
Right,
it, it
that makes
matters.
that's a completely different concept indeed.
Yeah. And I think
Um,
it matters what you were saying about point of view is like when you're thinking about your audience, and I love that specific point, specific subject makes your thesis, you are able to write specifically to something. You have that point of view in mind. I do have a
mhm,
question for you, Niels, as other people start thinking of theirs. Some people say so that this conversation is very closely attached to the niche or the niche conversation, right? Writing towards your niche, writing towards your niche. So I hear some people say, and I have said it too, early on in writing, and I'm primarily digital writing, not book writing, but primarily just we'll just say writing in general. Don't worry about your niche too early. Don't worry about your niche too early, right? I mean,
mhm,
you don't know yet. You have these broad categories that you're passionate about that are on your heart, but you don't need to narrow that down because you're gonna close yourself in too soon. While
mhm.
another group will say, 99.999% of people in the world will not read your writing. You're not talking to them. You need to talk to the 0.001%, and that's really narrow focus writing. So as you think about honing in on a single subject, where does the niche conversation come into that?
That is a very good question, and it depends a lot, I think, on what you want. Um, do you want to sell? Do you want to sell a book to a large audience, or do you want to tell your story? I have seen authors or potential authors uh, reject their work because they thought, well, there's just not there are not enough people who are going to buy this. And I thought that's such a pity because what you have is a treasure. Your story is so awesome. Why are you throwing this out? Yeah, well, it's just I cannot come up with any real outcomes. So you have to ask yourself, I think, in this regard, what do you want? Are you in it for sales? Then definitely you do need to write to the market. So a professional nonfiction writer who is in it for, well, to gain an income, uh, of course, has to write to the market. There's no way around that. But a person who has a message burning on his or her heart will come from a really different angle, right? So I think everybody who writes a book wants to sell it, but there is there's a difference between whether that is your goal or your goal is to tell this story the way it should be told. And I work, I think, mostly with people who want to have this story told, who know that they are not going to sell so many books, but they write these books for a particular audience that is actually helped by their message. For example, I worked with a therapist who wrote her book actually mostly for her clients, so that they have a way to read all of her ideas on the therapy and on attachment issues and whatever. It was a really fat book. Uh, it had some issues. I helped her overcome those, but I think in the end she expected to sell maybe 300 at most. So that is a relatively small number. But she wrote exactly what she wanted to write, and she is very happy with her book. And I think happiness is more of a return on investment than actual sales. Especially now that everybody is selling books, you cannot guarantee that you are going to sell a lot. What you can guarantee is that if you write the book that you love, that you are going to be happy with the result. So the question is really, what do you want? What does return on investment mean for you?
Yeah, and then as you write that broad topic, the market may tell you how to narrow that down even further. And then you write your next book, you write your next article, you narrow it down.
Mhm.
Nate, you have
It's
a
an
question.
organic process, of course. But I would definitely not. I wouldn't focus on niching down too early,
I agree.
unless you want to write a business book to help your business forward. That
Right.
is a different story. I'm talking here about redemptive stories that are meant to inspire other people or to improve their lives in some way. So yeah, the question is then, what do you want?
Yeah, no, that's a great question to ask, and that's part of your step one and step two process is
Right,
discovering
right.
that. Nate, what's your question?
Yeah, so maybe there's a danger here of like kind of asking two questions, and so I'll let you pick which one you want to answer. Um, One of them is I'm curious to hear from you about maybe some concrete examples of I like the way that you frame this as a unique opinion or a unique experience as being that point of view. Because when you said point of view at first, I was like, okay, well, what is that? And so maybe some concrete examples of like kind of a unique opinion on a subject that the people brought forward that you felt was really, really successful in like kind of narrowing things down. The other thing is in my experience about half of my writing, or maybe even more than that, is discovery. And then another portion of it is like saying, okay, based on the things that I have, like what am I saying here? How can I narrow down, right? It's almost like expanding and then contracting, right? Where there's some stuff where I have a sense of something, and in writing out, I'm trying to find the thing that I have a sense of, right? So I'll go off on rabbit trails and I'll realize, okay, that's extraneous. I can cut that out and stuff, right? But it's almost like the theme, if you will, emerges like kind of bottom up. Um, but there's another set of work that happens where I kind of like have a top down, like, okay, this is the point, right? And so I'm gonna like kind of outline things based on this point, and how to structure and support the point and stuff, right? That's more of like kind of a top down approach. Um, and so in this framework that you're outlining for these first 3 points, it is more of a methodical, like kind of there's the time for like kind of the things to marinate and stew, right? Where you're talking about like spending time with the Lord and praying and stuff. I see that as almost like, some of that discovery. But once you get to this thing about having like a specific point of view and stuff, that feels like it's more of the top down. Um, and so I guess my question on that is, does does what I'm saying there resonate with you? And then how in your coaching, how have you seen like kind of different authors approach this like kind of tension between top down and bottom up? Because I imagine the top down approach is more successful for some people and the bottom up approach is more successful for others. And it may be different from like kind of one phase of the writing to another as well.
Okay. Good questions. I'll start with the last one. Um, I have not coached so many beginning writers yet. I've been working with professional writers who have this top-down approach to begin with, because if you want to be effective in that regard, you have to work in that way. That being said, I think actually what I present is sort of a mixture of this bottom up and up down, top down, sorry, approach, right? I am actually beginning with laying this foundation of indeed thinking and praying. And actually, I should have mentioned that, but free writing and those kind of things are really a part of that. Also the unlocking the story. Free writing is a really important ingredient, and then that is how you expand this, and then later you can choose from all that stuff that you wrote, all that stuff that you made up, all that stuff that came to you. You can choose the elements, the ideas that work, and with those you can then work top down, basically. So it is really a mixture between those things. To me, I think if you only work top down, you end up with, well, the professional content writing. There is not really so much soul behind it. If you want to write an academic essay, then that is often what you're stuck with. Well, that's fine. But if you write a personal essay or a book about your own experiences, then you have to start from the bottom. And this unlocking your stories, well, indeed, free writing and a lot of creative things like making this map that is also sort of a figuring out what is there. Um, and I in my experience, taking a long walk and talk to yourself, preferably aloud, like crazy, but I often do that. I am always walking around talking aloud, to myself. Uh, to me, that is the same principle as free writing. This way I discover what I think. You need to discover what you think because it comes from the inside. You are not reproducing stuff that other people have been. It's not that you're making a report of research or something like that other people have been doing or you have been doing with a team. No, you need to find out what is inside of you, and then sometimes you need to do some research. Of course, you have to do research to find your point of view and to make sure that it is a valid point of view. You have to read the work of your interlocutors, basically. But you have to really dive deep. You have to do this groundwork of finding out what is actually inside of you. So my approach is actually, in my opinion, not top down. It is bottom up and top down at the same time, or first bottom up and then top down, if
Yeah,
you will.
it's an adaptive process. And I think that,
Yeah, yeah.
those first three steps as a reminder, and then we'll let you keep rolling with 4, 5, and 6. So it starts from the bottom. It's align, number one, align your heart with God's heart. Search, explore, pray, free write,
Mhm.
go on walks. That's that discovery process. Figure out what are you passionate about, because number two is unlock your redemptive stories inside of you. That you have these buried stories that we forget probably 99% of the things that happen to us, but they're not forgotten entirely. They're just like buried under sand. And
Right.
doing mapping processing, going through, there's some really good books by I can't remember his name, but he wrote Storyworthy. He talks about he will just trail with words that come to his mind, and he'll write stories of himself as he just lets his hand move freely on the page, and whatever story links to another, he just allows his
Mhm.
his words to flow from him, and that's uncovering these redemptive stories inside
Yeah,
of
yeah.
us. And that leads
Agree.
us to 3, and this is where that shift happens from bottom
Mhm.
to top. We begin to hone in on our single topic. Now, before you go into that, Janet just threw in a question. I think it's important. Tell us about a time when you had to choose between God's leading, what was popular, and to what was popular. So, like, have you ever had or worked with clients that had to deal with that tension of like, if I write about this, it's going to sell a lot or people will really like it. But if I write about this is what I'm passionate or God feels like he's leading me. How do you measure that tension?
Ooh, that is a very difficult question. I have once there was an editing client, no, copywriting client, who wanted to hire me for a gay dating site, and that was for me a bit difficult. And I said, well, I have too much doubts about whether this is the right thing to do, to uh, to cooperate. So this is a well-paying client, and I never heard back from them. So I lost my client, a well-paying client, because of my principles here. So I don't that doesn't answer the question. It's just something that popped up.
I mean, I think
Um,
it does in many ways. Like if you don't have whatever the principle is, you know, in whatever regard, like if you don't have principles, what do you have? Like if you
yeah.
don't have the
But
thing that
that being
you,
said, I do think it's important that I mention this. When I work with customers, I have no theological. I'm not going to reject an assignment or working with somebody over a theological statement, or whatever, because I really believe in this discourse that we should have. We should have a conversation about things, also the controversies. And I have worked with customers with whom I absolutely do not agree. And I'm still sometimes thinking about these projects like, why are they thinking that way? It's but I really want to make sure that whoever loves the Lord, whoever really cares about God, who wants the truth, even if they come up with something that I find completely nonsensical, that is the heart that I want to serve. So I actually forgot the question. So does this answer the question?
Well, and the question was, tell us about a time that you had to choose between God's leading and what was popular, what would sell. You may not be able to think of one for you, but a client, and you've answered a
No.
little bit of that for sure.
Okay. And what was the other question of Nate's? Because I wanted to try to answer that, the first one.
Oh, I think you've covered a lot of ground really, really usefully.
Okay.
I was just asking about like maybe some concrete examples of like kind of your unique point of view. I think we probably covered that good. So I can follow up on that offline, and we can keep moving just
Okay,
so that we
perfect.
make sure we respect your time and your content.
Yeah. So, okay, fine. Then
Thank
let's
you.
go. If there are no further questions, right?
Yeah, go for it, Niels. Let's
Oh,
roll
wait a
into
second.
point
I
number
do think
4.
that it's important that point of view in nonfiction really means something else than in fiction. In fiction, well, in a way it is similar, but in fiction, the point of view is whether you consistently stay in the mind of your character, right? That has to do with consistency. Point of view issues in nonfiction, well, that means that you are hopping from head to head, for example, or that somebody sees something that they couldn't see because the door was closed, or that is a POV issue. That's more of a continuity problem. But in nonfiction, it really stands for your own idea. What is your unique take on that? So you are, it's as though you are the character in your own story, and what is the point of view of that character? So yeah, there is clearly a difference. Now, I just wanted to point that out. Okay, the fourth action step: organize your ideas into a solid structure. So once you have this overarching thesis, that is the book thesis. That is what your book is about. But there are, of course, many ideas supporting that thesis, or that big idea. Some people call it the big idea. That's maybe a bit easier to think of it in that way. So you have smaller ideas that support this big book idea. And these smaller ideas typically become chapters, sometimes sections, sometimes a bigger idea is divided among more chapters, but just say one idea per chapter is somewhat easier to think of now, to see in your mind's eye, so to say. So all of these ideas need to be put into a logical structure, whatever structure that may be. There are different kinds of structures. I won't get into that, but there are many ways in which you can organize your ideas. But the most important thing is that it is logical and you guide your reader through your argument or through your narrative or whatever in such a way that they feel that they are in good hands. And I always recommend starting with from the big ideas and zoom into the smaller ideas. It's a bit as a painting, when you stand from a distance, you see that it is a painting or a painting of a castle. If you come somewhat closer, you begin to see the towers and the windows and the walls and the roofs and whatever. And yet somewhat closer, you begin to see maybe the small details like the bricks or whatever that it is made of. So I recommend first writing down the big ideas or typing them into a word processor and turning them into headings or something like that. Describe them briefly, all these ideas as brief as possible, so that they describe the idea. And if you read these ideas in the order that you write them down, you get sort of a story. Then these ideas form a little story together. And that way you will very easily hear whether the structure, the order of these ideas is logical or not. You know, the ideas become sort of a small summarization of everything you have. And that makes it quite easy to reorganize the whole thing until you found a little summarization there that makes sense. Does it make sense the way I explain it now, or is this confusing? Okay, I was a bit worried that without any graphics, it might be it might be a bit confusing. What I find so handy about this this approach is that you end up indeed with, by connecting these ideas, you end up with summarization, and that summarization is very brief. So you have the overview still to see holes in that logic, or to see when the organization isn't tight, if it doesn't make sense. So first, chapters. First, the big ideas in the right order. And then you can zoom into the chapters and actually divide all of the ideas that you have among all the chapter heads that you have. If you have hundreds of ideas, hundreds of little things that you want to say, that can be very overwhelming. But if you then one by one begin to place them underneath these bigger ideas, it becomes way more manageable, because then you can zoom into one chapter at a time, and within that chapter begin to organize those ideas again. So each chapter ends up being a solid logical list of ideas, basically, and the next chapter is also a logical idea. And this way you will have, from beginning of the book until the end of the book, all these tiny ideas in one long list that is very logical. I call it the idea track. It is, I think that's a better word than outline, because it illustrates how each idea flows logically into the next. That's the whole point of it. So also when you have story ideas or so, it can sometimes be more helpful to describe the idea behind the story and put that into your outline than just the title of the scene or something like that. Because what you want to see, you want to have an overview of how your logic works from scene to argument to the next idea, and this way through chapters. And by chopping it up into chapters and to sections and work from big to small, it becomes a much less daunting task. And you will also notice now when there are holes in your logic still. If within the chapter you see that you cannot manage to get one of these little summarizations of if after putting all these ideas, all these brief descriptions of your ideas into this logical structure, or into under your chapter, and you, by reading them, you notice that you cannot get a logical flow out of them, that means that there's a hole somewhere. There is an idea missing. There is something not right with it. You will also see when there's repetition, when there are different stories or different anecdotes or allegories or whatever that make the same point. You will notice those things. So it becomes much more doable to do that at a chapter level than at the book level. So that's why I say first chop it up and then zoom in. And you'll end up with an idea track that is basically an outline that you can use for number 5. Start with a draft. Why I always recommend to first make this outline or idea track is that you can then draft very freely. You can draft relatively fast, because then you don't have to think, like, what's going to come next. You don't have to worry about the next chapter or the next section. You know exactly what is going to come. You know exactly where you're going. And that helps you keep your author's voice clear. You know, it is very difficult to have a free expression, a free voice, if you are always thinking about what is gonna come next. You're always having to think strategically. Well, all the strategic thinking has already been done, so you can be completely free and fast in your writing, and that will make that you sound way less forced. You might sound very stiff if you are way too conscious of the of every sentence that you are producing. I had more to say about this. This is a separate action step because many novice writers think that what they begin to write is also what they are going to end with. As if once you had the last page and you wrote the end, that you're then finished and you can send it off to the publisher. I have worked with people like that. I have been reviewing books that were clearly written in that way, you know. So nothing in life works that way. Everything always works in processes. You see that in the Bible also. Everything is always, it grows. Nothing that we can produce is suddenly there, you know. It's always, there's a learning curve. There's you have to build things up from the ground up. So writing is no different. And this also means that you should not be too critical of yourself when you are working on this first draft. It's not that the first paragraph has to be perfect before you go to the next, because anything can still happen. You know, you can in the editing, in action step number 6, the self-editing step, you might as well remove much of the stuff that you wrote. Well, that is killing your darlings. Killing your darlings on steroids if you have worked so hard on all these paragraphs. So start just with a simple draft in your own voice and follow your idea track as much as possible. If you find that if some new ideas come up while you're writing this draft, you can always adapt your idea track. Of course, you can go back to that outline and see what can we take this into a different direction without destroying the entire book, you know. So starting with the draft so that afterwards you can start self-editing your work. And this is an extremely important part, but not the most important part. I think the most important part is getting this first part ready, that you to get these first steps right, that you know that you have the story, you know, because research has shown that a very good storyteller can get away with pretty bad writing, you know. Unfortunately, it is true that people are very forgiving of bad writing when the story is good. Well, I rather have all of it. I rather have all of it be perfect, you know. But start with the story, and that's why this is step number 6. I teach the FIRE framework for self-editing. That is finishing your draft. That's the first. The F, finishing your draft. Just to stress that you don't start self-editing your work until your draft is finished. Of course, you can tinker a little bit after you finish a paragraph or so, but don't get into the self-editing stage unless your draft is finished. And then the I, FIRE, it's inspecting your structure. Of course, in action step number 4, you have already worked on your structure, and while drafting, you have reviewed that structure also a bit. But now you'd have taken some distance from your work, you finished it, you slept a couple of nights over it. Now look at the structure again. Is it indeed not only correct and logical, but is it also the most powerful construction you can use? For example, sometimes it's helpful to take a scene, an engaging scene from later in the book, and place it at the beginning so that people fall in the middle of the action and are engaged by the story that actually was going to come a bit later. And that helps them ask the right questions, you know. So think again about the structure. Inspecting your structure is therefore the second part of the self-editing framework. And then refining the lines. And you zoom in on the sentence level and the paragraph level, and also the section level. This is more of the micro structure, basically. You look at the continuity. Are all the smaller sections flowing logically from one paragraph to the next and from one sentence to the next? So here you zoom in a little bit more, really at the sentence level and the paragraph level. And this is also a place where I find a lot of mistakes. That's why the FIRE framework is such an important thing for me to teach. Because very often the chronology is wrong, for example. People mention things already too early in the paragraph or too early in the section, so that they actually take away all the suspense because they have already basically told the outcome, you know. In some cases that is preferable, in most cases it isn't. Or when you have the feeling that that the writer is really going this way and that, you know, there is no logical flow. So this step, the refining your lines, is really about making sure that there's a very smooth flow from one sentence to the next, from one paragraph to the next, that nothing is in the way of the reader experience. Because if you only have to have one sentence that sticks out, like everybody who reads it thinks that one doesn't belong there, you know, and you have destroyed the reader's experience. So it is actually only about making sure that the reader experience is smooth. And then the last one, the E, fire, is editing the details. Only now we get to editing the details. So you don't have to worry so much about spelling and grammar or consistency or that sort of stuff, or word choice even, until the end, you know, because so much can change still. You might as well throw an entire chapter into the trash because it doesn't really fit with your thesis or something like that. So the more work you do before you get to this almost final, this penultimate manuscript, the more you have to throw away also. And that hurts, and you might actually not get yourself to throw away something you spent so much time creating. So all the way at the end, you make sure that all these tiny details like consistency and hyphenation, spelling, grammar, consistency of headings, of tables, of whatever stuff you're using, that everything looks the same at every page. And once you have done this, once you got through all of these steps and all of these frameworks, then you can be quite certain that the manuscript that you send to your editor will only need a relatively light copy edit, and that will save you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. I do need to stress that if you want to publish a book, and especially if you want to publish it hard copy and you cannot change anything about it anymore, you should really hire an editor, or at the very least a proofreader, to work through it so that you will not have any embarrassing mistakes anymore afterwards. I know that many people don't do this. I also know that a lot of books that are being published nowadays contain errors that are unnecessary and just a pity, you know. So I always recommend, do hire an editor or at least a proofreader. So that was my my framework.
No, this is so good. And I think it's important just to put a pin, or just to re-emphasize that self-edit part is last. Like, you know,
Yeah,
it
absolutely,
you
absolutely.
have to, and I love that structure of like, build your track, so then you have, you know, your guardrails, you know where you're going, and then
Right.
finish the draft. Start and or at least like get through it. Like, get through the words, go through the process of writing, you know, based on that track, and then go back and go. I love the fire framework too for editing, and then go back and just narrow down your editing. But that comes much later. You have to get the
Right,
words
right.
out in a draft first, and I think that's so
Mhm.
important for people writing any format, fiction or nonfiction.
Yeah. And if people need to write in order to figure out what they are thinking, and you know, some people tell me that they have to just start writing and see where they land. And I say, well, that's perfect if that works for you, but don't write your book that way. You know,
Yeah,
for all I care, you write a preliminary book or something like that. You know, a practice book, whatever. You
an
you can
ebook.
type entitled something that is not meant for publishing but meant for yourself, and
Hmm.
you can use that as an inspiration for your real book. Because I have just seen so many books that needed a lot of work just because they began to write. Just see what pops up, you know, what comes out. Um, and for some people, it also doesn't work. Their brain just their brain just doesn't work like that, to
Mm,
to have all these concepts, all these ideas, and to organize them. But in that case, I would say take somebody, hire somebody, or ask somebody to coach you in this to do this together.
mm,
Like one of my customers, my editing customers had so much trouble organizing her thoughts, and she wrote her book by just beginning to type well, and she paid a lot to get that fixed. So I had a conversation with her afterwards, like what could have helped you, and what she said was just somebody who would just help me by doing this together. Like, okay, we have all these ideas. How are we going to structure those, and give homework or whatever? But just some people just need help with this sort of stuff.
mm.
So that is also what I'm focusing on as a coach, to help people get through these steps.
Yeah.
But for others, this framework is just enough. They will manage just with these 6 guidelines.
Well, and it is a powerful, powerful guideline. And writing a book is an overwhelming task, and to be able to lay it down in 6 steps doesn't make it doesn't make it may mean that it's not hard work. It's hard work to
Mhm.
write a book no matter what. But it is not as daunting of a task or an insurmountable of a task whenever you have steps that you can follow. And Niels, you provide free content, I mean a free hour of coaching. You can answer a lot of this question about your book topic. And
Mhm.
you are willing to jump on calls. You're willing to have those conversations. So I want to encourage, I put in the chat, but I would encourage everybody who's watching this later, go find Niels on LinkedIn. He's putting out constant content from videos of his tips in a chair, his writing tips from his chair, to really inclusive articles and stuff on writing. And I would encourage you to go and visit his website, the yourbeststory.net. And there is, I believe you can find the email to contact you directly. You can find to jump on a coaching call. You can schedule a coaching call with you, and you have a community of Christian of writers. I don't know if it's specifically for Christian writers, but I know you have a community for writers where I don't know everything y'all are doing in there, but it is a community of building each other up. And so, where can people find you outside of that? What do you want to emphasize of that as we begin to land this plane today?
Um, about the community, it's Your Best Story Academy. On my website, there's also a link. There's in the menu this little button with Academy. So that leads to the community on Mighty Networks. It is not only for writers to connect, it is also for editors and proofreaders, and so to connect with Christian writers. It's only Christians actually, um, who supports my mission. Let's see, we have okay, here we help Christian nonfiction writers be deliberate and redemptive in their writing, thinking, and living, and to ground themselves in the love of God. That is that is the mission, and the question for entering is actually, do you agree with this mission?
Hmm.
And what I'm trying to find is as many serious industry professionals who can help the writers forward, and writers who write for passion, so that they can find the help that they need, and from there people can also get to me as a coach.
Yeah. So go to yourbeststory.net. Niels is a fountain of information. And just for the sake of time, I want to ask you one kind of closing question of a rapid fire. Niels, what song can you always sing to? Is like your go-to song. You will always find Niels singing this song if it comes on.
Oh, wow. um that is I have many such songs, but one thing that comes up, I'm really a fan of Neil Morse. Do you know him?
I don't. Neil Morris?
Okay, well, so what is his name? Sometimes I don't understand why I was born at all. It's like I'm a trial and I'm guilty. I don't know exactly what for. How
Yes.
I wish to be reconciled, that you would just love me with the heart of a child, etc.
There you go. Well, there that you just proved the point. You didn't even need the music, and you're singing along to it, and I love it.
Right,
So,
right, right. Yeah, you made
so
that happen.
go, yeah, go listen to some Neil Morris. For Neil's
Morse,
today.
Morse, like Morse code, Morse, I think.
Okay. Okay, like Morse code. Okay, great. So yeah, go. Oh yeah, Neil Morris. He has a song, "The Dreamer," or an album, "The Dreamer." So you can go find him. I just YouTube Morse and I found
Cradle to the Grave. That is the song, Cradle to the Grave.
"Cradle to the Grave."
Really beautiful. It's he also sings it with his son one time where bye bye.
Yeah. Bye, Nate. Yeah, and
It's a
Janet, you're
conversation
jumping off
between
too.
man and
So
God. The conversation between man and God. And one live session, he sings that with his 12-year-old son. Well, by now that son is 30, I guess, but
yeah,
uh,
yeah, it's been a
really
while.
good. Um, so yeah,
Well,
look,
Niels, you got me thinking that Niels, this has been valuable, and I'm excited to continue our relationship. I'm excited to see where your best story goes, and I'm just so thankful that you are just willing to come on and share these nuggets that you, like you said, 30 hours of coaching boiled down to 30 minutes. That's quite a feat. So thank you for being here.
you're welcome. My
Yeah.
pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll be back, and we'll make sure everybody knows it's on the Christian Story Lab newsletter when our next interview will be. And make sure you go visit Niels at his website on LinkedIn and get connected with him. And I know, just say, hey, I was with the Christian Story Lab people. I know he'll give you a VIP treatment that way. So, Niels, we'll talk soon, and thank you everybody for being here.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Bye bye.